So we'll start off with the cranial bones. There are several cranial bones. There are going to be certain regions you're going to need to know and sutures that you'll need to be familiar with for your upcoming tests. We'll start off with, of course, the frontal bone, which is here. As it goes back, it will then connect to the parietal bones, which are here and here. And then the parietal bone and the frontal bone will then connect to the temporal bone on the side, which is here. And then the parietal bone and temporal bone will then connect to the occipital bone, which is back here. In some cases, when bones come together and they don't form a suture, they will actually form bones within sutures. And so this bone right here is a specific type of bone that is surrounded by a suture called a sutural bone. So this would be a sutural bone. That would be a sutural bone. So those are examples of sutural bones. The last bone of the cranial bone would then be this bone right here, and that would actually be the sphenoid. It's actually the greater wing of the sphenoid. Now there are several regions that you will need to be able to identify on the skull, which includes the sutures. So let's go through the sutures now. This bone right here is the nasal bone, which is actually part of the frontal, part of the facial bones, and it connects to the frontal bone right at this point right here. And this is actually called the frontal nasal suture. Okay, so that is that right there. Above the frontal nasal suture is a region right here in between where the eyebrows would be, and this area is called the glabella. As we move further back, we get to the point of the back of the skull here, at this point right here where the frontal bone connects to that of the parietal bones. This area right here, or the suture right here, is called the coronal suture, and this area here is called the bregma. As we then move further back, we'll see that there's actually a suture that joins the two parietal bones together. This suture here is the sagittal suture. If we were to then follow where the external auditory meatus is, which is the ear canal here, and if we were to follow it upwards, we would then come all the way up to the top of the skull, or the apex of the skull. Now, in between the apex, which is here, and the bregma, which is here, this area here is basically the top of the skull, which is known as the vertex. So this would be the vertex here. So bregma, vertex, apex. As we move further backwards, you can see that the sagittal suture comes down and separates, forming a suture going this way and this way. This suture that connects the parietal bones to that of the occipital bone is actually called the lambdoid suture, because it forms kind of a lambda symbol as it forms the suture. Now as we turn towards the, or wait, before we turn to the side, this area here where the lambda suture splits, this area here is known as the lambda, or the lambdoid region. Okay. So we turn this way, we can see that the suture comes down and then it heads to this process here. And this process is known as the mastoid process of the temporal bone. So the suture that splits off and goes downwards and runs, connecting the occipital bone to the temporal bone, is called the occipitomastoid suture. That's what that is there. And over here, we have this suture right here, which connects the temporal bone to that of the parietal bone, and this suture is known as the squamose or squamosal suture. And this region right here, where the ethmoid bone would be, the sphenoid bone would be, is actually known as the pterion, P-T-E-R-I-O-N, pterion, right there. Okay. Those are the regions and the sutures that you need to know for the cranium. We'll have another video on the facial bones.